it is the little things, it is the daily things that end up composing who we are in so many different levels.
Welcome to the Be Well Baby podcast. I'm Dr. Emily Spaeth. I'm the founder of Be Well Baby here in Portland, Oregon, and the creator of the Beyond Birth Blueprint, where we support families all over the world. This podcast exists because pregnancy, birth, and postpartum care in this country are fragmented, rushed, and often missing the whole picture. And I believe families deserve better. Here, we talk about bodies, babies, nervous systems, feeding, recovery, and real life through a grounded, trauma-informed lens. I'm so excited for today's conversation because I feel like in so many ways, Danielle can articulate things that I have felt and believe to be so true in a way that kind of ties it back to ancient wisdom and to just a real life experience. So today I'm sitting down with Danielle Hanna. She is an Ayurvedic practitioner who has been supporting life's transformative stages for over a decade. Whether it's just those daily wellness needs, the postpartum experience, or navigating perimenopause and menopause, all of those transitions, her approach is one of deep healing where life itself serves as the teacher. And each moment offers an opportunity to align with your authentic self. It's a really beautiful way to approach healthcare. In this conversation, we talk about why postpartum care is not a luxury. It is foundational to your long-term health. And Danielle shares some beautifully simple practices that can make a real difference during this major life transition. And you will hear us talk about the reality of life is so much more complicated than just sitting down and taking 10 deep breaths. Finally, we get into the power of community and why showing up to that weekly support group, even with mismatched socks, unbrushed hair, covered in baby spit up, might be the most important thing you do for yourself postpartum. And just a quick loving note before we dive in, everything you hear on this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It's not medical advice. It's not a substitute for care from your own team. Every body and every baby and every season is different, and you deserve support that is personalized to you. All right, let's get into today's episode. Well, Danielle, why don't you start by telling me how you came to do the work that you do?
Well, I really came to it, honestly, a little bit later in life. I was going through a lot of difficult times and reevaluating some of what my life looked like. I can now refer to that time as early perimenopause, though I didn't know it at the time. And some of that included looking at how I was going to support myself financially. And I had been a longtime yoga practitioner, and Ayurveda, which is yoga's sister science. I had heard about it. I had been interested for years at that point, and I decided I think I really want to go more deeply into that. And so in early 40s time, I put myself through graduate school as a single parent and with 2 young kids. I did this thing, and through that process, it was really a big awakening and discovery of something that I really also just completely needed in my own life to navigate the terrain ahead.
Yeah.
And while I was in that program, I did like the first year program, which is more of a counselor level. And then I did a couple more years, which was practitioner level. And then I decided I'm going to keep going. I'm going to do my master's degree. I'm going to focus on everyday health, because to me, it felt like an area that what I was seeing in my clinical times with my teachers was it didn't matter what the disease was. If we didn't have some really good daily health in place, if we didn't have good routines that were well aligned to the time of life we were in, as well as the time of year, and maybe even the time of day in some cases, that it was really hard to get traction on being well. And so I started studying preventative health as not like a sidebar to what everything else, but as the thing to do.
Yeah, that's so incredible, because I think in the Beyond Birth Blueprint, the online birth prep that I have, there's a module called the Thrive Method, and it is just the basics, which is T stands for tuning in, H stands for hydration, I stands R. How do you spell thrive? R stands for rest.
Yes.
I stands for intentional movement. V stands for building your village, and E stands for what you eat. So it is those basic things that none of us are capable of doing for ourselves.
Yes.
Why, like, as somebody who's studied preventative medicine as the thing, why do you think that's so hard for us?
Honestly, I think it's a super important, really excellent question. I think about it a lot because I get asked it a lot. And I think one of the things that I've thought about the most has been around this idea. People often will say to me, Ayurveda has so many rules. There's so many things you need to do. Wake up at this time, eat this way, follow this routine, don't eat these foods, eat these foods, all of these things. And I got to thinking a lot about that over the years of working with folks. And I think the thing that I'm sort of resonating with at this time is really in our Western culture, we're not giving or given ourselves much context, sort of discipline around what time is the good time to eat and what foods are right for us and how much sleep should we have. We're not really ever taught those things very well as this is a frame of being.
Right. We're told you're not drinking enough water. We're told you're not getting enough sleep, but we're not really told for your body, for your specific situation, here's what you need.
Yeah. And so I think what I've learned with Ayurveda is that it gives us guidelines that are firmly rooted in a science. Ayurveda means the science of life. It is the study of all of the sciences as understanding on how do we live. I mean, it's best with prevention, but certainly applies to disease as well. My area study is prevention. My doctor, her area study is something totally different, disease and much deeper. When we start understanding that there is some really good sensical ways of being attuned into our life based off of nature, circadian rhythms, time of life, I think it helps me understand why there might be some guidelines as to how we might do that.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about Ayurveda, the culture around Ayurveda and the doshas?
Yeah, a little bit. I can. I mean, I could talk about it a lot, but maybe I'll condense it a little.
Let's condense it just so that we give people, someone listening to this, because I'm a yoga teacher and because I have this background, I know it so intimately. And I know that some people listening are like, what are they talking about? So
true, indeed. Ayurveda is the science of life, as I mentioned. It is the study of all of the life sciences as a way to be informed about how do we live. And that includes how do we live in different stages of life and in different times of the year. We can also think about it from the containers of the doshas. And for most people, if we have learned anything about Ayurveda, at least here in the West, we might know these terms of the doshas, Vata, Pitta, Kapha. And those are really important for understanding. But I like to think about it even more specifically. What are the doshas defined by, if you will? And those are defined by a series of elements, the 5 elements. Those are space, air, fire, water, and earth, in that order, from the most subtle to the most gross. And we know that each of the doshas is an amalgam of the elements. And so when we're thinking about our health, it can feel very abstract to think about it from a doshic lens. Like, what does that really even mean to have a strong Pitta constitution, or I'm Vata, or something like that, if you want to name it in that way. I like to think of it instead of understanding the elements and how we might use the very important concept of like increases like and opposites balance, which is a law of physics that we all adopt here in this country too. as sort of guideposts to help us begin to understand how we might center ourselves best in health. When I think of pitta, which is primarily the fire element with some water, and if you're feeling a lot of high heat, we might think of, well, okay, like a fire is something is tangible. So maybe I might start working with the notion of like increases like, and opposites balance by maybe stepping away from things that are fiery or increasing heat in the body, like that 5-alarm chili, or going in a sauna every day for 40 minutes, or some of these ways that might provoke heat. And for me, that feels like a really tangible way of beginning to talk about Ayurveda, which is such a broad and incredible science, but in a very sort of boots on the ground, hands-on, this is how we might do it. Does that kind of circle the question a little?
Yeah, I think so. The other piece about this is that Ayurveda is from India. It's a traditional medicine structure from India. And that's why it's linked so much with yoga. And I'm curious how you use Ayurveda and how you use all of these concepts to support people postpartum.
Yeah. Well, Ayurveda has a lot to say about daily health and prevention. When I think about something like postpartum, for example, there's not a pathology to it. It is a natural transition of life. There is a massive change that goes about in the body, the mind, the consciousness, as well as the spirit during the process of pregnancy, birthing, postpartum. Ayurveda says that that process is really big. It impacts the body quite a bit. It impacts the mind quite a bit and the spirit, because as yoga also says, the mind, body, and spirit are intricately connected with one another. There's no separation. So going into it, we're automatically understanding that frame. When we go through a birthing process and we come onto the other side, it is very common that, of course, our attention rests as the birthing parent on the child and understanding how to feed and support ourselves. But there is also a really huge thing going on within us that needs care, attention, time, and healing. Ayurveda, as well as many traditions around the world, view that as important times to focus or take care also on the birthing parent as well.
Yeah, I think it's really easy in our culture to ignore that piece of postpartum. We are trying to heal your body postpartum so that you have healthy organs when you're 70, not just because you need energy next year to chase a toddler around.
Yes. Or that, in my experience, because a lot of the work I do postpartum care with people, folks are the category that it can fall into really easily is like a spa treatment or something. And it's not, but to me, it just opens up the context of how we don't really have a lot of languaging to describe what it is that we're doing, that we're going to put it into a category that's, sort of labeled as like luxury. To me, that conjures up ideas of like luxury. It conjures up ideas of like, I don't need this. It's an extra.
Yeah, who am I to treat my body with such love and care when I need to buy groceries? But in actuality, it's a necessity to heal your body postpartum. And so many of us just ignore that piece.
I mean, I agree with you in heart and spirit and in mind and body. And there is no other way for me to see it at this time in the life. It becomes difficult because it can link to what is a feeling of shame if it's not being done, or, I can't do that. It's like an other thing that I can't do. And that's the last thing that I think birthing parents need to contend with, right? When they're going through it. So I always wanting to be in an education process, just like what you're doing here. This is why I got so excited to come. Thank you for having me and got so excited to be here. And I'm learning about some of the things that you're doing in your own postpartum work with others. Because through education, we can start unraveling and untangling these myths that have been created that say it doesn't matter what you just went through, or I don't have the time, or also I don't have the money for it. I don't have the capacity for it. Mm-hmm. So how do we unravel some of that and come to it in a different kind of way?
Yeah.
And it's an important question I'm very curious about. Right now, I'm in the education process of just talking as loudly and as much as I can to as many people. I mean, maybe I'll get a sandwich board next week and start walking around as like...
I feel you. I feel you so much. This is why this podcast exists, because I was realizing that some of the conversations that I was having with people in the community were conversations that everyone in the world needs to hear.
Yeah.
And I think there are so many of my clients who are having babies a little bit later in life. And so they're coming out of birth and postpartum straight into perimenopause.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that transition and maybe even some things that people aren't aware of that are symptoms of perimenopause that they might be experiencing right now?
Yeah, it's very true that often we're having the babes later, and with all of the massive hormonal shift that happens in postpartum, we're kind of dangling on the edge, especially if our bandwidth or capacity or our systems are feeling depleted, if we're not well resourced, lack of sleep, shift in hormones, all of these things can really add to that. And so we start touching into, wait a minute, my cycle has started to shift even after, I'm nursing, but it's been a year and a half. I'm not the same cycle as I would. Maybe I'm having some different bleeding. I might notice things like hair falling out. We might observe anxiety, of course, also insomnia, digestive shifts.
This is so hard because I feel like you're saying also normal postpartum things, right? Like your hair is going to fall out around 4 months. You are going to have potentially some postpartum anxiety.
Yes. Well, when does it cross the line? That's a highly unique and individual discernment, to understand that, yes, these things do sound like postpartum, and they are a part of it. And some of it is very common. And when does it cross over into something different? I think that's a question worth asking. And it's certainly a question worth asking your provider, who you might have intimate conversations with or know these things. Because also sometimes, to be honest, I mean, this might just blow up a whole other different kind of conversation, but I would also say in my experience of sitting with people in my office, blood tests don't often or always articulate perimenopause. Like, it doesn't necessarily work out so clearly.
Yeah.
And so it's my experience that if things are happening, if you're noticing a lot of shift and change, and you're feeling yourself tired, feeling draggy, foggy, your bandwidth is a word that I often use, meaning like your capacity is a lot less than it used to be. It's well worth having some conversation with providers who can understand and know how to work with this.
Yeah. You probably already have one of these, but if you don't, I wanted to tell you all about the Aura Ring. I started using it postpartum with my second baby so that I could actually see how poor my sleep quality was. And watching the subtle shifts over time has been incredible. It tracks your heart rate variability, your sleep, your recovery, even the little changes in your body temperature. before you notice them. It was really amazing to see my stats change throughout my third pregnancy and then watch them improve postpartum. One of my favorite things, it actually gives me permission to rest. And as someone who struggles to rest, that is everything. It really points me to recovery in a way that nothing else does. You can click the link in the show notes for 10% off your Oura Ring, or if you already have one, grab one for your bestie or your mom for the holidays. They deserve rest too. What does it look like to work with you? I think we've sort of been talking around what it is that you do. So what if I were a pregnant person looking for postpartum support, what would it look like to work with you?
Yeah, usually sometimes there are current clients that are I'm working right now with a dear client of forever. She's having her second kiddo, or she just had her second kiddo, first kiddo during the height of COVID when nobody was around. She couldn't do anything. This time it's a little bit different. And so I've had that relationship with her, but oftentimes it's not that. Someone might call me and usually we have a conversation about what they're interested in terms of having care. I offer a package called the Rituals of Care, which is based off of my longtime practices and education, put together to be an integrated, holistic experience of what I believe as a practitioner is a holistic mind, body, spirit experience to tend to the big changes that happen. We might say the first 42 days is great because that is really truly when the body is making some of its biggest adjustments, of course. But I would say I've seen really amazing things happen with people who are integrating some of these things even a year, 2 years after that bandwidth, that capacity has been pretty drained, and so giving back. And what that looks like is after sitting down with somebody and having a consultation, learning about their life, their history, their habits, doing some of my own sort of practitioner support, pulses, tongue, checking on their physical body. I put together a plan that usually involves a few things. One of those things is the practice called Abhyanga, which is a practice of loving care, loving touch, moving warmed herbal oil over the body. Not too hard. I'm not a massage therapist. I'm not moving muscles. I'm not doing anything structural. I am tending to the largest organ of the body, the skin, calming, soothing with oils that are indicated based off of what I'm finding from meeting with them in the consultation. We do that every time. I offer this package as a single or also as a 6-week, meaning I come once a week for that, first chunk of time. And
I can't even imagine how nourishing it would feel to have somebody just coming to tend to you and care for you every week for the first 6 weeks postpartum. There's so much focus on the baby. I remember I had this one client who I happened to have a student with me when I went back from having my third baby, and my student brought my baby with us to every session. And it was just this beautiful, it really felt like a village.
That.
Oh my gosh. It was magical. And I could do, maybe I will, but I could do a whole podcast on like the structure that I believe should be in place for young women to be around babies, because our society doesn't support it. Anyway, that's besides the point.
No, it's not, but an important point. Really a part of this too. Yes.
But we were in her bedroom. I do pelvic floor therapy. And so her baby was there. My baby was there. My student was there. And I was doing this pelvic floor assessment. And after the treatment, I trained in both Western pelvic floor physical therapy and with Tammy Lynn Kent, which is holistic pelvic care. So it's very energetic, and it's, I really believe in bridging the worlds and blending both. And so after our session, my client just was in tears and was like, I have never felt so held by women just in my bedroom, helping care for my baby while helping care for my body. And it was just such a beautiful moment. And I can only imagine that your clients feel so supported and cared for. For anyone who has never experienced Abhyanga massage, it's like you said, it's not really massage, but I experienced it in India when I was actually injured and ended up in an ashram. And that's a long story, but it's how I became a yoga teacher.
That's a good story.
But I recall Abhyanga being like the messiest thing that I ever did, because you're just covered in oil, and then there's oil in your hair, and there's oil just everywhere. So logistically, how do you do that in people's homes?
Yes, it's a really good question. There is logistics to it. I've been doing it a long time. Oil is not usually a liquid substance that likes to be contained, in my experience.
Right.
And so there is some containment. I mean, as part of Abhyanga, or as part of Rituals of Care, I show up with all of the things in baskets and folded little bundles, and a massage table, and food and pelvic steam pots and all of these things. Everything is, I find that with oiling, and it really is person dependent, I try to contain the oil a little bit more than what my experiences are and have been a lot in India, for example, where oiling is traditionally done, on a wooden table. There's not sheets or warmed surfaces underneath it. It's a very different thing. So I try to contain it. I tend to not use quite as much oil in that way, but make sure that it gets into the body and that they're still receiving the warm, nourishing touch and care by smoothing that oil on in a really nice flow and rhythmic pattern. And I find it's pretty amazing. It's a game changer.
Yeah, that's so cool. Let me ask you this. What is one, so there's so many people, I'm sure, listening to this who don't live in Portland and won't be able to work with you, but what is one practice or mindset shift that you wish that everyone could take for long-term well-being?
Yeah. I mean, you can do self Abhyanga, which I would say I would highly recommend it, as just because it's so helpful and useful. So there is that practice, and you can find those things online and sort of self do, which is great and can be really important and also necessary. But I also really love why I call it the Rituals of Care, the package that I offer to people, is because the idea of a ritual is, I think, sometimes a missing piece in major transitions of life, and postpartum certainly falls into that.
Yeah.
When I think about what is health, what is being well, I can't separate mind, body, spirit connection. So if I think about something to be done regularly in postpartum, if you're, somewhere far away or even somewhere close in, but it's just not an accessible thing, I think about creating maybe a little space of awareness where you might do something very simple or something very elaborate. It might be placing a candle or some flowers. It might be a beautiful piece of art, a place to sit where you could see outside, or whatever calls to you. And come to that place maybe once a day or once every other day, as much as you could, to even sit or be there for a moment of pause, or maybe it's a stillness, and just take, just as if it's so easy to do in all the abundance of time that is going on. So please pardon me, friends. I don't mean just to mean like, oh, just do this thing like that, right? But more, can you find a space where you can sit for 10 breaths, 10 conscious breaths, and be for a moment You're going to feel it acutely in the moment, physiologically. You're going to have a shift a bit in your nervous system, maybe in your body, and you might even have a connection to something that is important to you that in the busyness of this time gets easily put to the side.
Yeah.
And so I really love that kind of thing that doesn't require a lot of upkeep, but it helps us to be embodied. It might help us regulate to ourselves. And maybe if baby's on us, we can do some co-regulation at the same time, which is lovely.
I love this because I think there's something really challenging. And I love that you acknowledge the word just sit down. And I had one the other day I was, running too fast and I was, my ADHD brain is already doing 10 things at once. And so I just was moving and moving and moving. And my sister was like, why don't you just make yourself a cup of tea and enjoy the cup of tea? And in my mind, I was like, that sounds like torture. It sounds like the worst possible thing for me right now. I can't possibly do that. I don't want to do that. But the idea of having a space that feels really good and that all you need to do is sit there for a moment, and that those moments, day after day, week after week, month after month, accumulate to a practice that is intentional and that allows you some space. And I think the most creativity and the most, without space, we can't make change where we're dissatisfied. And I think that having that kind of space just opens up your mind to the possibilities of, if you're unhappy with what's happening, you can make a change, but you can't even see that if you're moving too fast. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's true. And I mean, some people are not able to make change in the immediate. The field is not even for everybody, I don't believe. And also, there are times where bringing ourselves to the center in whatever way speaks to us can be an absolute foundation and ground to help us manage through a difficult time, if that is something that we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially postpartum, there's a feeling of being stuck sometimes, especially if feeding is not going well. That is like one of the biggest mental health hurdles, I think, in postpartum. Is if feeding your baby is challenging, then everything in your brain and your body is telling you that you've done something wrong. And it's not true, but it's our biology, and it's really hard to counteract that. So yeah, I love just the idea of finding that moment of grounding, and at least you have that, in those really challenging moments.
Yeah, agreed. You're talking about something to me, it's making me think a little bit on the power of, in working in preventative health, so much of it is about the daily. It's the mundane. It's like the, okay, scrape the tongue, show up to the thing, like it's not a very glamorous world. And also, it is the little things, it is the daily things that end up composing who we are in so many different levels.
Yeah.
And so it is the mundane, it is the simple doing over and over again that can be, sort of an offering of this little flower to the mound of the part of you that is like, I am moving in this direction that I want to be a part of. And to me, it's in that mundane that is really where it happens every day.
You said something earlier about luxury, and I'm curious if you want to talk a little bit about reframing self-care from being this extra thing to being really foundational to health and longevity.
Yeah, I think it's a part of a paradigm shift that I feel very invested in my work, both working with people in postpartum and daily health and also menopause, because we've adopted or heard these words for a long time. Self-care. They become these like buzzy word things, and it's easy to lose the meaning of what it is we're doing. And then it gets sort of taken out of context, and then it doesn't hold the same impact or meaning anymore. And as a result of that, we're like, this feels like I don't have time for this. I don't have capacity for this. I don't have money for this. And it starts feeling like this other thing. And going back to some of our original conversation or earlier conversation where we were talking about how in our culture, it's hard to find investment in taking care of ourselves daily because we're really not given any good understanding or wisdom often. Maybe not across the board. I don't want to always say always and forever, but many of us are not given a roadmap about how we take care of ourselves in daily health. I think that if we had a little bit more of that conversation, we might more easily understand that oiling our body or scraping our tongue or eating foods that are well aligned to help support good digestion or any of the number of other, you as a pelvic floor therapist, in some ways people might consider that too. I hate to say it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I think of this with pelvic steaming in the same way. And if we could start changing the understanding that it's not a luxury item. And I wonder if some of that is around this why I feel education is so important, because we can start like debunking the myth and the mystery about these things that are like out there that you have to go to a fancy place and have them done. But can we begin to educate ourselves about how we might understand these practices and how they support our health and why we might need them and how we're going to go about doing that? I feel like that's the shift. That's the paradigm shift to me that starts happening from something that is luxury based to something that is health based because of the nature of the transition of that time of life and how important it is to help bridge from being pregnant, postpartum, into our new form.
Yeah, it is a new form. It's a new role. It's a whole new family structure. Everything is new. I think one thing that I tell my clients all the time is, Beyond Birth is a membership. So you pay a monthly fee and then you get to hang out with me once or twice a week on a call, but you also get every course I've ever created throughout birth education, et cetera, et cetera. It's a lot of content, which is why it's meant to be ingested over a longer period of time. Yeah. And it is so much more support than a 3-hour long birth class. And I tell people, you deserve this level of support. Like, it shouldn't be a luxury. It shouldn't be extra. And you should want to invest in yourself. And it's hard because spending money is such a complicated thing for people, and choosing what to spend your money on is really complicated. But if you're doing it on, like, you're investing in your longevity when you work with Danielle, for example, and it really feels like so many people think they don't really deserve that level of education. They don't really deserve that level of care and tenderness postpartum.
Yeah.
But I also love the idea that, you can do Abhyanga to yourself. If your baby ever needs a pacifier, and not all babies do, the one that I would want in your world is the Ninny. It's the only pacifier designed to actually mimic the shape and function of the breast. It looks like this.
It's very soft here, like an areola, and then harder, like a nipple. And this shape means that it supports healthy oral development instead of interfering with it. I really love it because babies don't just passively hold it in their mouth like the ones with the bulb on the end. They have to actively suck. It's hard work. It's my workout pacifier. And that matters for feeding, for regulation, and for long-term oral function. It's especially beautiful for breastfed babies who need a little extra soothing without confusion. If you're listening and you're pregnant, postpartum, or buying for someone you love, you can grab a Ninny through the link in the show notes or use the code BeWellBaby for 10% off at checkout. It's one of these tiny little tools that makes a huge difference. And my favorite part about it is that babies don't get dependent on it. All right, let's get back to the show.
You mentioned 3 things that I want to kind of highlight because I think they're really good takeaways for people. If someone is listening to this thinking, yeah, I want to oil myself every day, what kind of oil should they use?
Broadly speaking, I'll give you two guidelines, knowing that every person is really unique and different, but we can begin to apply some guidelines here. So if you are experiencing a lot of heat in your body, night sweats, heartburn, any other indicators of heat that you know to be true within you, you're going to want to gravitate, or even if you live in a place that is very hot all the time, you may want to consider gravitating towards something that's going to be still nourishing, but cooler. And that might look like something like coconut oil, for example. On the other end is sesame oil, which is much more warming. It is sort of like a gentle hug. Sesame oil is considered the king of oils in that it has multiple purposes and values in so many different ways, but it is very warming. And this is where things get a little more complicated. And so what I suggest to people is, if you're not sure, if you're having like hot and cold, if you're rashy, if you're having any things show up to you that don't necessarily fit so easily into one category or another, maybe try a few days of rubbing one of those oils that is applicable onto your feet and see what you notice from that. See if you start getting rashy or if you start feeling really hot. Maybe that's an indicator that the sesame oil is too warm, and vice versa for the coconut oil. But generally speaking, sesame oil is one of the primary oils used, as just like hand over fist, so good for you, so nourishing. And again, I will say it depends. And I'm laughing right now as I say it. I feel all of my teachers in the background going, yes, because I feel like that's the primary message that each of them have said over the years to anything that I've ever been involved with. They will start by saying, well, I'll tell you, it depends.
It depends. That is the same thing in physical therapy. It should be the same thing in all medicine, I believe. It should be. Sense. It always depends. And when people ask me, really specific questions, it depends on about 10 factors, and then I can give you an answer,
So true. Same here. Same. I think it's important to understand that it's not arbitrary, that there is something going with these oils, with these herbs, with steaming, with, in my case, I'm only speaking with food that has action headed in a certain way.
So my next question was going to be about food. You mentioned eating foods that are nourishing for you. Is your answer going to be, it depends on your constitution what you should eat?
Yes, it could, but let's give some broad strokes here. How about that? Because there are probably a few things that I can say. Generally speaking, there's a few things to avoid, and that's all based off of digestion. So you might consider avoiding things that are really cold or frozen, foods that are very heavy and thick. That does not mean that you don't want nutrition. We do. We just want the foods to be able to be digested by a system that's a little bit impaired because of birthing. And so how can we offer foods that are warm, that are maybe a little soupy in nature, and so the body can work with the natural enzymes and natural digesting process more easily. Things that are room temperature, if you're adverse to warm to hot, liquids and things, then how about room temperature? How about we keep it there? Those are some of the very general guidelines that I think are easiest to work with.
Great. I love that. That's true across cultures, right? That you really are looking for warming foods postpartum.
Yes, it's true. I don't know I haven't really heard of any great wisdom coming through cultures and traditions that are, thousands of years old that say much different. There's a lot of similar philosophy, at least so far that I've heard in my years of study and practice.
The third thing that you mentioned was tongue scraping, which I'm sure half the people listening to this are like, oh yeah, I do that every day. And the other half are like, what does that mean?
What is that? It's a great practice for everybody. And it is on the subject of mundane and taking care of our health. Focusing a little bit on the senses each day is a great idea because our senses inform our perception, which then create our reality. So what we see, feel, hear, do, smell, touch is informing how we are in this world. Giving a little time and care to each of the senses is great. The mouth in particular is an important one because, well, for a lot of obvious reasons, including hygiene. But the mouth is where the first stage of digestion is happening. It's our body's sort of like, hello, body, I'm getting ready to digest, to send food into you to help create my physical form, feed me, and then release the rest of it. So in the mouth, in our first stage of digestion, we want to make sure everything is working well and functioning well. When we do tongue scraping, which is like, looks kind of like a condensed horseshoe, it has this sort of funny little shape, and you might see them in copper or stainless steel, and each of the different mediums has different quality to them.
For like the general person, would you say
stainless steel or copper is usually for general use is usually an easy one to stick with. And then you'll want to gently scrape your tongue with this scraper. And there's videos online on how to do that. So I won't take up a lot of your time. But what we're doing here is we're gently cleansing the mouth after a night of sleep in particular. And most importantly is that we are getting digestion going and also potentially starting motility, moving the bowels through the body, because the tongue and the mouth is where that first sort of indicator is beginning to happen. So something as simple as a gentle tongue scraping each morning in particular as part of your toothbrushing, water picking, or whatever flossing that you do, and oil pulling can be really super helpful.
Amazing. Oil pulling being essentially doing like a rinse or mouthwash with oil in your mouth.
Yes, and there's different ways of doing it. And again, it's all tied in with having good pH and balance in the mouth, and oiling can help establish some of that.
It's amazing. Oil on your skin, inside your body, it's all good for you.
It's true. There's a lot of oil happening. We're kind of like, to be quite crude about it, if I think about a car, like a car needs liquids and oils to work. All those joints, the movements, the brakes, the levers, all the things that are going on underneath the hood require it. And in a crude sort of way, we are kind of these incredible machines too, with beautifully dear pulls and levies and rotations and ball bearings.
Yeah, we're very intricate.
We are so intricate, and we need these liquids and this hydration added into our lives, because honestly, we're living pretty fast and and furious, if you will. And that tends to be kind of drying. Postpartum can also be a time that's very drying. And so we need to get back. We need to give back. So you'll have me talking a lot about and referring to oiling, oil.
Danielle, do you have a favorite ritual of your own for reconnecting with your body?
Yes, I do. And I would say, I am postmenopausal. I have two kiddos, 23 and 26. So they're kind of, really into their own lives a lot more than they certainly were 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm kind of on the other side of where I sometimes say to when I go into talk with like support groups of new parents, like it might seem that we're worlds apart from each other, but we're actually very similar, because while you're trying to figure out how it is to do the things with the kiddos, I'm trying to figure out how to do the things with myself again, and I think so. I preface my own rituals by saying that my time looks a lot different than it did 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and certainly when they were young kiddos. And I think it's really important to, claim that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Time of life really matters.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I find for my own self that every day I have to sit quietly for a little bit of time. And some days that gets expanded a little bit because I am in that different time period. And each day I usually do some form of pranayama, moving, life force. Some people refer to that as breathing, but prana is life force energy. It is not breath alone. And so if we think of it like that, it puts a pretty big stake into what's at stake with it. So I usually do some form of pranayama every day, and either some reading or some journaling, or sometimes, depending on the time of the year, it might look a little bit differently, but that quiet sort of connective time in the early morning is something that I pretty much feel like I can't miss out on. When you've just had a baby and you go to the grocery store for the first time and you feel like your whole side of your body is missing, and it's this most strange feeling. It's that's what's coming for me now with being regular in practice. Like I don't feel quite the same if I'm not able to do those things.
Yeah,
and the time is right. Right. And the time is right for me, and it's not causing harm to anybody. In fact, without it, I can't be there as a support to others.
Yeah.
It's a requirement, and my commitment to that too.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's also such a nice reminder that, there are different seasons in our lives, and the season that you are in right now might be that you have 3 kids screaming at you every time you try to sit down. And that's okay, because there are other seasons coming.
Yes. It's important I like to think of it as in the span of life, as opposed to, this thing that is never going to end, because it might feel that is true. I mean, I personally, my first child postpartum, it was a really hard, horrible experience. I was not doing any of this stuff, by the way. I was not aware of it all at this time, which is, I think, why I advocate so hard for it now, because I've seen so much of what the power of some of these things can really do and are for folks.
Absolutely. Danielle, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you are absolutely, share?
I think the only other thing that I would love to include in this conversation is the power of community, and how postpartum time can really feel like an isolated experience, because it's hard and there's a lot to juggle, and it can keep us sort of at home, or if we have to go right back to work, we're sort of trying to manage all of those parts. And I know for me, as I was just saying, with the birth of my first kiddo and it being so hard, and I fell into just like a horrible ditch. So I would not even classify it as like the blues, or I would say that it was much more significant and longer term than that. And the thing that like got me enough through it, and I held on to it like it was everything in the entire world for me, was the weekly circle of folks that showed up. At that time, it was led, the one I was going to was led by a lactation person, and it became, I mean, I got there like no matter what. I don't care if my hair wasn't brushed, my teeth wasn't, I did have like mismatched socks. It just did not even matter. It was a lifeline in a time where I needed that, and that was what was available to me. And so I would just add that if you can connect in some way with someone else who is even, in a similar time frame, it doesn't have to be anything broad or fancy, but I think coming together with other people is of likeness, like what you're providing with your membership, it's like, it's kind of giving the skeleton of holding a community in a very specific way. That's one way to look at it. And also it can be like the postpartum support group that I got to be a part of a couple weeks ago. It's just like, I think I emailed your person in your office after saying, Emma, Emma. My mouth hurt when I left because I was smiling so hard. And I just was.
It's really incredible because there's something so powerful. Yes, with Beyond Birth, it's an online community and we all share, and it is a support group essentially. With education. But there's something very powerful about that Friday morning support group because you are all making the effort to get there. And when I started it, it was just the tail end of COVID and there was nothing. And I was shocked at how many people came in masks with their newborns because you just need to get out of the house. I had a very similar experience with my first where I didn't care what was going on. I would show up. At least I could show up to that one thing. And I knew that everyone else was in that same chapter. And even if we didn't agree on how we were doing things, just having the ability to feel seen and understood, it is just so powerful. So if you're in Portland, Oregon, I have a list of resources on my website for every day of the week. There is something going on. There is also New Mom School, which I'm an expert that comes and presents at New Mom School, and they have 8-week cohorts. There's Papillon Collective in Northeast, and they have cohorts as well. And it can be just this, one of the people who now runs our support group, Emma, like we were talking about, Emma was a mom in that support group and it was everything to her. And she wanted to come back and lead it because it was life-changing. And she's still friends with everyone she met that first time around.
That's so true. It's really such an important thing. I sometimes get to lead one. Bridgetown Baby does one in person and one online each week too. And I cannot express the amount of what I feel like is just all the right kind of helpful, useful, supportive things that go on there. And it is often, messy, and maybe there's tears, and every single person that's in there completely understands and sees where you are too.
Yeah. One thing I hear from people a lot is that they're afraid that their baby will cry. And I'm like, they will. And everyone else's will too, probably all at the same time. Like everyone will be asleep and then all of a sudden all the babies are crying. And it's okay. You just kind of keep moving. And the more we do it, the easier it is. And the easier it is to hand your crying baby to someone so you can go pee and then come back and realize that someone actually was able to soothe your baby and it wasn't the end of the world. And it's just very, very powerful.
Yeah.
So wherever you are, find your postpartum support groups because they are everything.
Agreed.
But Danielle, thank you so much for talking to me today. It was an absolute pleasure talking about all of this.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really makes, it feels like some days when I look out into honestly a world that is unrecognizable to me in so many ways. I have to acknowledge that, and I have to acknowledge that some days I don't know what to do. And then I get to show up with a new family or be involved with a group of people, and I see life happening, whether it's in whatever transition or phase of life that person's in, and it's like the reminder of our humanness and the reminder of what is so important
And
now,
universal.
and universal. Yeah, so thanks for your championing of work with all of us and all of the families that you touch. I feel very inspired and also grateful for it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I know I say all the time that my mission is really to change the way that people think about preparing for birth and having a baby and postpartum and that first year of their baby's development. All of those things we don't prepare enough for. And I want the world and healthcare to be different. And it's a huge job. So thank you for helping me do it.
Absolutely. Go team.
Go team. It's such a fun conversation and so amazing to find people who are trying to do the same thing that you are trying to do for the world, and to feel like we are all on the same team moving towards the same goals. It's just so inspiring. Thank you so much, Danielle, for sharing your wisdom with us today. If you're in Portland and you'd like to connect with her, you can see the link to her business in the show notes. And she offers ritual care packages for postpartum families. That is the reason that I interviewed her, because so many of the families that I work with have used her services for this transformative time and could not speak more highly of just feeling so held in this really, really tender time. Danielle also leads support groups through Bridgetown Baby. And if you're looking for community, check out the link in the show notes to our resources tab at Be Well Baby. I have a list of pretty much every local postpartum resource that you might need in the Portland metro area, including our Friday morning support group at Alma. Wherever you are in the country, in the world, find your people. And if no one has a postpartum support group in your area, find online resources. There is so much out there for you. That community and feeling like you're not alone, because you're not alone. Whatever experience you've had, somebody has had something similar. You just have to find your people. And that community, that connection really does make all the difference. I'm so glad you're here, and I'll see you next week. New episodes drop every Wednesday, and you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on Instagram at BeWellBabyPDX, or just visit BeWellBaby.org. Send an episode to someone who's pregnant, postpartum, or just needs guidance. No one should have to do this alone. Welcome to the Be Well Baby podcast. You're in the right place.